So let's try painting some stone. Right off the bat, I'm going to use the angular lasso tool to create a rough geometric shape and then just fill it in with a flat color. Then I'm going to grab a lighter color and I'm basically looking to establish some lighter planar aspects, um, you know, to determine the lighting scheme. So here we're just going to go with like a basic top down ish light. And you'll see me just like cutting in shapes here and there, just trying to discover the main look of the rock and its primary facets. I'm just looking for interesting shapes at this point. Then I'm going to go in with a slightly darker color. I'm just going to add some extra cuts just to push in some shapes a little, give it a little depth here and there. Just find something that'll just be a basic, kind of like this reads as a rock kind of shape. So you could do that with very few colors. I mean, for the most part, you could do it with just even two colors. And so inspired by the reference I have on the side there, I'm grabbing another color and just kind of mixing it into the surface. Gives it a little more interest, a little more vitality. You'll notice that most stones or rocks have quite a bit of variety within their local color, so that you can kind of throw anything onto the surfaces and give it some life that way. It can be a good opportunity for you to get creative with the kind of colors and tones that you as an artist like to see. Just kind of brushing over the surfaces with different hues, just to kind of brush up the interest a little, because you'll notice if you look at any rocks around or on the reference on the screen, they have quite a lot of variety. And so you see me, I'm kind of defining the shape a little more, playing with the light and dark areas to make sure they read more distinctive from one another. The cracks themselves can be pretty much designed how you want, but also keep in mind different types of stones will have different ways of breaking. So make sure to grab some good reference if you're aiming to make a specific type of rock. And you'll notice looking at it, there's pretty much just three values at this point. The top light plane, the one kind of facing down to the right, facing towards us, and then the one facing to the left, which is even darker. And if you could just use three colors really and design some shapes in there, you could feel it out pretty quickly. So here I've switched to an overlay mode just to push the contrast a little more. Kind of just brushing over the top plane with a lighter color just to pop the value. So you'll notice it kind of keeps all our details there, but brightens them up in a really quick, easy way for us to adjust. So here I'm switching back to normal brush mode. I think it's looking pretty good. So at this point, I'm just deciding to define some more of the edges and crevices a little more, either popping them out or pushing them in with some stronger values. I'll usually save this step for last once I'm happy with the rest of the shapes. Though to be honest, depending on the type of rock, you probably don't need to do much edge highlighting. It's kind of your preference at this point. In a lot of cases, though, you'll generally want to refuse doing the whole like brightening the edges completely because it could come across as artificial or heavy-handed. I think I'm mostly done with it now. Just kind of touching it up here and there, adding little creases and little marks where I deem necessary. But otherwise, I think we're ready to move on. So now I'm going to do a different type of stone, more of a flat surface. Kind of same thing as we started before, where we're just going to throw down some colors, give the surface some interest right from the start. this point, I'm just kind of throwing in some lights and darks, kind of feeling out some shape ideas right from the get go. You could stay sloppy at this point. Just get down a bunch of different hues, shapes, see what stands out to you. This part should be fun for you. You go in kind of low to no pressure and just say, hey, what can I get out of this? That's kind of the fun part with a lot of materials like this because there's so much natural variety with them. So right here, I just kind of pick some shapes I liked, and I'm going in and defining some light planes and some dark planes, kind of designing how we want it to look like. Honestly, I really think this is probably the most important part because, as I mentioned earlier, even with just two colors, you could design the entire look the surface is going to have. And here I'm just messing around with it a little, exploring some of the shape language, trying to find something I like. Try not to feel too attached to anything at this point. Use this time to just kind of go bold, throw that stuff around, see what stands out. With this one, I'm trying to keep it pretty simple though in general. Just a couple small cracks and have the rest of it just be the surface speaking for itself. And you can see just kind of with a dark and a light color there, we immediately can pull in these shapes, define more interest. Here I'm using a soft brush a little to both lead the eye towards the center, but also gradients tend to add interest in general because of the way light hits surfaces. Just gives it a nice feel. You're definitely going to want to paint over your textures after you do any kind of soft brushing, because usually it can lead to your painting having a very fake digital looking feel to it. Unless you're specifically looking to achieve a really soft airbrushed surface, a lot of times this is going to be dictated though by whatever art direction your project is going to have. But more often than not, you're going to want to go in, do some color picking, and then paint over it. Tends to feel better that way. I'm going in, defining the cracks a little more, push some of the shapes in deeper. You'll also notice me just kind of going around color picking, just peppering some of the different values and tones around, just building up the surface interest a little more, getting smaller and smaller as we go along. Kind of playing around here with like speckling it. Even with really subtle value differences, you can see how the surface changes, how the feel of it changes, where you get these like light undulations based on what and where you're painting. It's really fun. So after I'm satisfied with most of the shapes, I'll use a brighter color to like pull out the form more and give the impression of some lighting, as if the light's hitting and those angles really popping them. This part can be really fun because I'm kind of viewing it as sculpting on a flat surface. It's really nice to see how the values themselves, when you're painting them down, affect the interpretation your eyes have. And then we'll kind of finish off with the highlights that we just did, as well as going in and pushing back more areas, defining some chunks with some darker colors. And I tend to work down in value at this point. I usually work fairly restrained value wise, and then go in and put the darkest tones in at the end, as well as sometimes a lot of the lightest tones. Usually save the contrast, really pushing the contrast for the end there, and you can find that your texture can really pop that way.